everything I did was to not be like her.
So you get arrested 6 times in the span from when you're 15 to you're 19. Is that correct?
I got arrested 6 times between 18 and 19.
Wow. So on the first arrest, you weren't saying to yourself, wow, I'm acting like my mom. Or you were on the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. Or at least it was until the sixth where it took you to change your behavior and look at yourself in the mirror as that person, right? Because before you had been doing the same actions, but it was resulting in you getting arrested again and again. So why is that the case? Why on the sixth time? And what happened on the first 5 times? I've never really heard you go too deep into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people are like, what'd you get arrested for? I'm like, being drunk. like, like being drunk, getting caught with liquor. Like, honestly, I don't even remember what every exact time was. I'm pretty sure it was like 5 MIPs and something else. And, the first few times, I think it was hard for me to feel like I was going in that direction because it was just being a fuck off in college. You know what I mean? Like, I truly just didn't think about long-term consequences at that point in time. And I feel like actually what it was is that I had been so hard on myself for so many years. And ever since I had moved in with my dad for that next 4 years, it was like, I held myself to such a high standard. Like I worked out every day. I did all these things. I hung out with good people. Like I got good grades, but it felt like there was this, like, I had built a lot of rules for myself about what I am not allowed to do because I didn't want to be like her.
Like what?
You can't drink to the point where you get drunk like that. An example. Like, you don't go out and party like this. And I think I built a lot of those rules thinking like that would, mentally, I'm like, if I don't do those things, then I won't be like her. And then the moment that I got out of my parents' house and I had my own money and had my own place to live and all these things, I was like, I just remember the sense of freedom feeling so great and feeling like, gosh, I'm so sick of all of these rigid rules that I've made for myself. And I kind of rebounded in the other direction. So it was like for years, I went so far in one direction that it feels like it almost like catapulted me into the other direction where I felt like, God, I'm so sick of like my whole life feeling like I've just cared so much. I've tried so hard, like from a young age, because when she was in the house and I was 9 years old and I'm taking care of her and I'm taking care of the house and I'm making sure that we have food and I'm going to my friend's house and I learned how to take care of myself. But I felt like I was young and didn't know how to handle all that. And so I feel like this resentment almost built up. Anger of just feeling, honestly, like I felt like it wasn't fair, right? Like I felt like things weren't fair. And I think that I hadn't thought that through. And so when I got to that age and all of a sudden I was in this environment where I could not do all of those things and also not get really punished for it because it's normal in college, then I felt like it's okay. It's normal. I also was around a lot of people who that was not unnormal. Like it was like not a weird thing to like be getting super drunk, blacked out, doing drugs. And so I think it's who I surrounded with myself with. It's the environment that changed. And that coupled with this just anger that had not gone away.
So then at 19 years old, you say like, all right, that's it. 6th time. And you start listening to Tony Robbins, Jim Rohn. And, it's pretty crazy because 5 years later, you're running an incredible business worth millions of dollars, have millions in your bank account. That's 5 years of time. What I'm curious about is to explore like that first year in more depth. What were the things that you did when it was most difficult? Because I feel like that's often the place where a lot of people get stuck for many years.
Yeah. I made a decision in that moment that it wasn't like, what are the things that I'm going to do to change right now? I was like, I am no longer this person. Done. And it was like, I'm not saying this is what other people should do. I'm just sharing what I did. I was like, I am not this Leila. Who I was yesterday, who just got arrested, who just did all of this bullshit, no longer me anymore. I am a new person. I am now this person who's on this path. And I remember thinking that. I was like, I can just choose to be completely different today, as awful as it may feel. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I feel so awful right now. I don't think I could feel worse. And so I can either feel awful and be the same, or I can feel awful and be better and at least start to make myself proud of who I am. And I think that that was the primary thought that I had in my head, is like, it feels awful either way. Only one way is going to get me to a life that I know will actually be one I'll enjoy later on. And I think I'd been sacrificing so much of my future for the things I wanted to do in the moment, and the, urges, compulsions, whatever you want to say, drinking, going out, doing drugs, like just indulging in all of that. And it was just like a switch. And I just chose to turn it on. And I think there's a lot of superstition around change that tells us that it takes a certain amount of time, that we need to be able to do a certain amount of things. And I've just found over and over in my life that that's an illusion. And that's just what works for plenty of people. But I also know that I have a gear that I can kind of put it into where I can just flip a switch. And that was what I did. And then it was like literally the next day, I joined a gym. I threw out all my crappy food. I looked for a lease to go move out so I could live on my own. And I went on like all my social media. I took out everybody who I didn't want to be friends with anymore. I unfriended everything. I think I made a new profile. And I was like, this is no longer my life. I'm not doing it. And I think a lot of it was honestly just driven by a new sense of like, I thought to myself, if I keep doing this, what does my life look like in 5 years? And the thought of, if I continue to gain weight, if I continue to get arrested, if I continue to hang out with these people and do drugs, what is likely to happen? And I remember like thinking that for such a period of time, for the last like 2 years, I felt like I was almost invincible to like the laws of nature. And in that moment, realizing I'm not. And I think that that was what was a big wake up call, is realizing like, at what point is enough enough? And at that point I was like, I'm going to make it today, because I don't want to see what this could turn into. And so I think the biggest thing that I did in that moment, if you think like mechanically, what did I do? Is I changed my environment very quickly. I went and I got a new apartment and I lived by myself. I didn't live with 6 people who partied and smoked weed and did drugs all the time. I surrounded in terms of like the content I was consuming, I started consuming things again that were actually productive and aligned with what I wanted to be, rather than, keeping me stuck where I was. I threw out literally all the food, even though I didn't, it's like you're in college working jobs. It's like you don't have a lot of money. I'm like, I don't care. I'm throwing it all out. I'm getting like egg whites, yogurt, and soy milk. Like it was like, and tuna, tuna packets were like what I lived off of. And I think it was just taking that massive action to create a different environment. I think that in the end, that was the best thing that I did for myself, because when you change your environment, that new environment no longer accepts the version of yourself that you were. It only accepts you stepping into a better version. And I think that I believe in autonomy and free will to a degree. But I think outside circumstances have so much more power over us than we think. And if you go into a circumstance, let's look at like a relationship, right? There's a girl. Every time she wants attention from her boyfriend, she whines and cries, and then he gives her attention. And that's because he finds that acceptable. He tolerates that kind of behavior. She goes and gets into a relationship with a new guy. She cries and whines, and he's like, bitch, I'm out. Does she keep crying and whining? If she wants the boyfriend more than she wants to cry and whine, she will learn to not cry and whine anymore. And so the same goes for situations of like where you're living. It's like, if I surround myself with new friends who find it gross to like go out and get blacked out and do all those things, then the likelihood that I go out and get blacked out and do all that is low, because I don't want to lose all of my friends.
If you enjoyed this clip, watch the full episode right over here, and don't forget to subscribe.